بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله ومن والاه. Continuing with the ahkam of ibadat related to specifically the patient and the doctor. Previously we talked about ahkam al-tahara. Now we will talk about ahkam al-salah. So the first discussion is about istiqbal al-qibla, facing the qibla, and we know that uh, for the validity of as-salah, one must face the qibla. And the adillah for that we can find from the Quran, the Sunnah, and the ijma of the Ummah. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran in Surah Al-Baqarah was number 144 mentions قَدْ نَرَى تَقَلُّبَ وَجْهِكَ فِي السَّمَاءِ. We have certainly seen the turning of your face, O Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, toward the heaven. فَلَنُوَلِّيَنَّكَ قِبْلَةً تَرْضَاهَا. And we will surely turn you to a qibla which you will be pleased. فَوَلِّ وَجْهَكَ شَطْرَ الْمَسْجِدِ الْحَرَامِ وَحَيْثُمَا كُنْتُمْ فَوَلُّوا وُجُوهَكُمْ شَطْرَهُ. And so turn your face toward Al-Masjid al-Haram, and wherever you are, turn your face towards it in prayer. Right? And the story behind it is that when they migrated to Medina, for the initial 6 months or so, they were supposed to face Baytul Maqdis. But the Prophet ﷺ had an affinity to his hometown in Mecca, and so he would used to look at the sky waiting for orders of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to actually give him a green light to turn toward Mecca. And so this ayah is basically telling him to do that. And from the Sunnah, in a hadith mentioned in Sahih Bukhari, among others, the Prophet ﷺ mentioned إذا قمت إلى الصلاة فأسبغ الوضوء ثم استقبل القبلة فكبر. When you stand up to pray, perform the ritual ablution properly, and then turn towards the qibla and say the takbir to start the prayers. And then we have an ijma of the entire ummah that except for two scenarios, it is wajib that a person should face the qibla. That is fi hal al-qital, and when you are riding on an animal or any other vehicle for that matter, and you want to perform nafil prayers. In these two cases, even if you're all healthy and well, you don't have to face the qibla. Now, once we know the normative ruling about facing the qibla, let's turn towards uh, the scenarios that a patient may face in this issue. And so there are two possible scenarios. So number A is that the patient can face the qibla either by themselves, right? Either they can situate themselves facing the qibla, or maybe uh, have their whole bed shifted to face the qibla. In this scenario, if that is possible, it would be obligatory for him to do so. If they pray in any other direction, then the prayer must be repeated because they've necessarily left out a condition of the validity of prayer without any valid excuse. The second scenario is the patient is unable to face the qibla or maybe turn their whole beds towards it. And neither do they have anyone to assist them with two things above, right? So when you can't do it yourself, you don't have anyone to help you, and then you fear that you're gonna miss your prayer if you don't pray now, then as much as they can, they should try to face the qibla, and whatever direction they're able to, that would be considered valid, the prayer, because they're now sharan excused. Now, in the second scenario, in which he wasn't able to turn himself to the qibla, and he didn't find anyone to help him with, say it was Asr and you're done praying Asr, And then when you're done, there's still time left, and someone comes along who can actually help you with it. Would you need to repeat the prayer? That is the question. Well, the answer to that is no. According to the majority of scholars, at that time, the thing that was thought of on you was to pray in whatever direction it is possible, and you completed your thoughts. Once you've done that, there's no need to repeat it, even if that missing condition can now be fulfilled. Like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions, لا يكلف الله نفسا إلا وسعها. Allah does not charge a soul except within its capacity. And at the time of prayer, the capacity was to face any direction and not specifically the Qibla. So this is similar. This situation is very similar to a person who's engaged in battle, right? You're like facing the enemy, but the Qibla is behind you. And you really can't face backwards because if you do, they're going to attack you from the behind. And so you're engaged in battle and you're physically restrained from actually facing the Qibla. And so therein, that is considered a valid excuse in which you don't have to face the Qibla. You pray while facing the enemy with your back towards the Qibla. Right? And people under such conditions, they're not supposed to or not obligated to repeat their prayers, even supposedly the enemy just retreated and they're no longer there. But the prayers performed in that hala, in that condition, they don't need to be repeated. So that's number one. Another example, another discussion around prayer is the co-joining of two prayers, right? So we know that there are two prayers or two groups of prayers that can be combined, Zuhr, Asr, and Maghrib, Isha. Then there's discussion about when can you actually combine them. Can you actually combine them or delay the other and pray the after them beforehand and things like that, right? So for patients, for Marwa, they've come to this conclusion that you can combine Zuhr and Asr and Maghrib and Isha if a patient feels hardship in praying each of the prayers in the prescribed time, right? The evidence of this is following. So Ibn Abbas radiallahu anhu, he mentions, this hadith is all mentioned in Sahih Muslim. جمع رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم بين الظهر والعصر والمغرب والعشاء بالمدينة من غير خوف ولا مطر. That the Prophet ﷺ combined two prayers, a Zuhr and Asr and Maghrib and Isha, when he was in Medina, من غير خوف ولا مطر. Neither was he fearing any enemy, nor was there any rain which would have conditioned him to grow. Right? And we know because he was in Medina, he was not traveling either. So there is no safar going on, there's no matar, rain, and there is no khawf. There is no fear of any enemy attack or anything. And yet he's still combining the prayer, right? Now one might argue because the Prophet ﷺ, he prayed like this, you can, in any situation, combine Zuhr and Asr, Maghrib and Isha if you want. In fact, a minority of scholars have adopted this view. But the majority of the Ummah, they state that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions in the Quran, Inna salata kanat ala al-mu'minina kitaban mawquta. That rarely prayers have been prescribed to you on specific times. Now, this verse of the Quran tells you each prayer has its own time. So, just out of the blue, combining them without any reason goes against the essence of this ayah, the meaning of this ayah. So, that's why the majority of us says, the fuqaha, that you cannot combine two prayers without a valid excuse. So matar is an excuse, hope is an excuse, suffer is sometimes an excuse. What do you do with this hadith? This hadith of Ibn Abbas radiallahu anhu. Uh, the majority agree that this is in the case of maras, when a person is sick, even if they're not traveling, right, and there's no hope for matar, sickness in itself is a valid excuse that would allow you to combine prayers. So that's one of the things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has granted al-maraza with. The third hukum is missing Friday and congregational prayers, right? And there are a lot of textual evidence for this. So in a hadith of Ibn Umar radiallahu anhu, he mentions that the Prophet alayhi salam said, in this hadith mentioned in Bukhari and Muslim, uh, صلاة الرجل في الجماعة تزيد على صلاته وحده 27, right? Uh, a congregational prayer is like 27 times more meritful than just a single prayer, right? So there's so many benefits of praying in congregation. Like it actualizes al-ubudiyah, a person's servitude to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? Uh, because when it's time for prayer, you leave everything behind to go towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So maybe you're praying in your house with all your or your workplace. So it doesn't give a complete sense of ubudiyah, of servitude, because you can just quickly finish your prayer and go directly back to work. But when you choose to go to the masjid, you're leaving everything. You go across, you make that entire journey towards the masjid. Uh, there's nothing distracting you and everything. So that's one of the benefits. The other benefits of congregation prayer is the unity within the ummah, right? So there's a lot of emphasis on gathering for congregational prayers and gathering for Friday prayers. However, if for the maris it is difficult to actually come to the masjid, right? Difficult in the sense it's like we would say near impossible because either he can't find someone who can assist him to go there, or that it's excruciatingly painful for them to actually come to the masjid for prayer. They're allowed to leave Jumu'ah and they're allowed to leave the Jama'ah. Right? If it's something like a headache or maybe a small fever, that's not a valid excuse uh, to leave the prayer. But if you really are in a position you can't, so Ibn Mundir, he mentions that I don't know of any disagreement among the people of knowledge that a sick person is allowed to absent himself from congregational prayer due to illness. This is for men because Jumu'ah is not wajib on females, on children, people imprisoned. Neither are Jama'ah obligated for females or children. So talking about exemption for those two people doesn't make sense. Like for men, it would because normally it's either wajib or sunnah mu'akkada on them. Khayr, what allows you that tarkul jama'ah is permissible? First of all, the event of Prophet ﷺ mentioned almost all hadith books that when he became sick at near the end of his life, he said, Muru Aba Bakrin fal yusalli bin nas. That order Abu Bakr to go pray with the people and to lead the prayers. And we know the house of the Prophet ﷺ was next to the masjid. But when he was very sick, uh, he didn't go to the masjid and instead appointed Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu on his behalf to do so. In another hadith of Ibn Abbas radiallahu anhuma, the Prophet Islam he mentions, "Man sami'a nidaa falam ya'tihi fala salata lahu illa min udhrin." Uh, Whoever hears the call to prayer and does not come to it, then there's no prayer for such a person, for such a male, unless he has a legitimate excuse. This does not mean if someone is healthy and doesn't go to the Jama'at that their prayer is unacceptable. It means that it's not a perfect prayer. It isn't the most virtuous, the most meritful prayer. The hadith is not talking about the validity. Except if you have a legitimate excuse. In that case, even if you're praying inside your house, you will inshallah get the same ajr that you would have if you went to the masjid. So this is for leaving the Jama'ah. Is there any specific hadith related to Jumu'ah? We actually find that as well. So Tariq ibn Shihab, he makes mentions a hadith of Abu Musa Ashari, who heard the Prophet ﷺ say, الجمعة حق واجب على كل مسلم في جماعة إلا أربعة عبد مملوك وامرأة أو صبي أو مريض. That Friday prayers is a rightful obligation on every Muslim except for a slave, number one, number two, a woman, number three, a minor boy, and number four, a sick person. So this hadith very explicitly mentions that sick people, they don't have to pray to more. Now, let's talk about a very specific cases is missing Friday and congregational prayers for hospitalized men. So you're in the hospital. Does that just give you a warrant to not go to the Jama'ah and pray? Well, actually, there are two kinds of patients, male patients, admit to the hospital. So, number one, patients who are unable to leave their beds due to the severity of the illness or because of the doctor's orders. Then, obviously, in such cases, the patients aren't obligated to pay the congregation. The other types are patients who are actually able to leave, right? Then their ruling depends on the circumstance. So, either the mosque is close to the hospital or within inside the hospital, and it does not cause any undue hardship when they have to go and pray within the mosque or the hospital prayer room if there's congregation being conducted there. Secondly, it's not that near to the person. The mosque is outside the hospital and far from it, or the hospital prayer room is far from that specific patient, and going to any of them would cause them undue hardship. Then in this case, they would count from the first category that they are exempted from praying with Jama'ah, right? As far as the private prayers are concerned, it is permissible for male patients not to attend them if the sickness qualifies as such. Allahu alam bis sawab. So these were some of the masail related to patients when it comes to as-salah. Now let's turn to fasting. That is the third ibadah that we're going to discuss. So first, nullifiers of fast, right? We know fasting means abstaining from three things. Number one, sexual intercourse. Number two, eating. And number three, drinking. So basically, these three things are the nullifiers of fast as well. How do we know that? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned in Surah Al-Baqarah, verse 187, أُحِلَّ لَكُمْ لَيْلَةَ الصِّيَامِ الرَّفَثُ إِلَى نِسَائِكُمْ, that it has been made halal for you in the nights of your fast, الرَّفَثُ إِلَى نِسَائِكُمْ, uh, intimacy with your wives, right? And then he mentions وَكُلُوا وَاشْرَبُوا حَتَّى يَتَبَيَّنَ لَكُمُ الْخَيْطُ الْأَبْيَضُ مِنَ الْخَيْطِ الْأَسْوَدِ مِنَ الْفَجْرِ. Eat and drink until the white thread becomes clear in the sky from the black of Fajr. ثُمَّ أَتِمُّوا الصِّيَامَ إِلَى اللَّيْلِ. And then complete your fast till the night. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions three things you can do in the night. Al-Rafath, Al-Aklu, Al-Shurb. And then once Fajr dawns in, أَتِمُّوا الصِّيَامَ إِلَى اللَّيْلِ. Then complete your abstinence till the morning, till the night. So the verse mentions only these three things, and from that we know that these three things are the things that are going to invalidate your fast if you do them. in your fast. Mhm. There's also a fourth thing that is mufsidus sawm, which is al-hayz wa nifas. So menstrual or postpartum bleeding is also something that invalidates a fast. Prophet Islam he mentioned, it is it not the case when a woman menstruates she neither prays nor fasts? So this tells us that this is also one of the things that invalidates the soul, nullifies the soul. Now there are conditions. These muftirat that we've mentioned, they're only nullifiers if they meet specific conditions, right? And there are three in total. Condition number one is knowledge of the legal ruling and time of fasting. The person should know this. So if they were unaware of the legal ruling, and remember this is only the case when you're living in Darul Harb. If you're living in Darul Islam, or actually in a case where there's a large enough Muslim population that the ilm of deen was available to you, then not having the knowledge is not an excuse. Right? So knowledge of the legal ruling and the time of fasting, these are conditions. If a person is unavailable of this, then their fast would remain intact, valid. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions as a part of dua, which He accepted, لا تؤاخذنا إن نسينا أو أخطأنا. Our Lord, don't impose blame upon us for that which we have forgotten or erred. And in another verse of the Quran, Surah Al-Ahzab, Allah mentions, وَلَيْسَ عَلَيْكُمْ جُنَاحٌ فِيمَا أَخْطَأْتُمْ بِهِ وَلَكِنْ مَا تَعَمَّدَتْ قُلُوبُكُمْ. There's no blame on you for the things that you did mistakenly, but that which your hearts had intended. The Sunnah also confirms this meaning of the Quran, is when a Sahabi came to the Prophet of Islam, he mentioned, In kana wisaduka idan la'aridan. Your pillow in that case must be very wide, right? But he didn't order that Sahabi to redo his fast. So what happens is when this ayah came, حتى يتبين لكم الخيط الأبيض من الخيط الأسود, when the white and black threads become apparently clear. So one of the Sahaba took it literally and he placed two threads, a black and white, under his pillow. Obviously, they didn't have lights or anything at that time, and what he would do is he would lift up his pillow to see whether he could distinct between the white and black thread. Until he could do that sufficiently, he would keep eating. And when when it's time for daybreak, usually there isn't enough light in the sky that you could actually make that distinction. And so you could only do that when the sun was very high up in the sky. Unlike the Prophet of Islam, basically a slight tambi saying that, well, your pillow must be very wide if it encompassed both the night and day. But he didn't order that Sahabi to actually redo his prayer, his fast. In some fiqh, for example, this is not the case. If you mistake the time, for example, you would have to make qaza of your fast. In the Hanafi fiqh, for example, if you mistake the time and you either break the fast early or do not and keep eating until it's sunrise, uh, that fast is not acceptable. You would have to make another one on its place. Right? So remember the difference in opinion and follow according to the method that you're following. The second condition is uh, remembering. Remembering that you are fasting. So if someone forgetfully eats or drinks, we know that this does not nullify the fast. But if you know you were fasting and then you end up doing that, that is going to invalidate the fast, right? And so same thing, uh, no muakhza on someone who makes a mistake, as in the verse of the Quran. And the riwayah of Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu, he also uh, kind of elaborates the same thing. من نسي وهو صائم فأكل أو شرب فليتم صومه فإنما أطعمه الله وسقاه. If anyone forgets that he is fasting and then ends up eats and drinks, he should complete his fast, for it is only Allah who has fed him and given him drink. And the third condition is al-qasd, uh, intention. So this means that a fasting person willingly chooses to engage in the nullifying act. So if someone does not willingly do it, their fast would still remain valid. This is again a point of ikhtilaf between the fuqaha. Some say that intention is not necessary. Even if another person forces you to do so or it accidentally happens. And so in the Hanafi, for example, it still nullifies your fast. Sure, there's no kafara, but you would have to redo this fast once Ramadan is over, for example, or in any other day if you were fasting Nafi. Okay? But as far as the fiqh concerned with the book, it mentions that intentionality is the third condition that is necessary. If it was unintentional, that it would not invalidate the fast. So according to this, if a person unintentionally inhales dust, it takes in his throat, reaches his stomach, it won't invalidate the fast because he did not inhale the dust deliberately. Similarly, if a person is forced to do so because someone threatened to kill him or break his leg, for example, and they do it in the fast, it's still valid because they don't intend to do so. Likewise, a person who experiences a wet dream, his fast remains valid since the sleeping person has no volition, has no control over this happening. These were the general rules regarding mufsidat as-sawm. Now let's talk about specific medical conditions, right? The effect of medical procedures, nutritional patches, and oral medications during fast. What would be the implications when a person is fasting? So our first example is that of an inhaler. So a person with severe asthma, for example, who can't go the soul without having to use their inhalers, what would their hukum be? So first of all, what is this inhaler we're talking about? This is a device which contains aerosolized medicine. So it's medicine that is in the form of air. So it consists of chemicals, water, air, and oxygen. It is used by deeply inhaling while you're simultaneously pressing on the inhaler, the button on top of it to release the medication, right? So the legend mentions using an asthma inhaler does not invalidate the fast because A, the spray emitted from the asthma inhaler is an aerosol that only reaches the lungs in order to widen the vessels and bronchioles that are tightened by the asthma condition. The spray does not reach the stomach and is not food or drink or anything similar to those. Even if some of it reaches the stomach through the gullet, the amount is very small as the inhaler contains only 10 milliliter of liquid medicine, which is sufficient for 200 doses. This means that each inhalation contains a negligible amount of 0.05 of liquid medicine. Second reason why asthmas don't invalidate fast is sniffing water into the nose and rinsing the mouth are permissible for the fasting person, even if some residual water reaches the stomach with swallowing of the saliva, right? Therefore, whatever reaches the stomach from using an inhaler does not invalidate one's fast, and you can make pass of it with the water that is left in the mouth once you're done rinsing your mouth. The third piece of evidence is the use of miswak. It does not invalidate the fast period, even though according to doctors, it contains 8 chemical substances that protect the teeth and gums from diseases. And obviously, these chemicals are broken down by the saliva and they enter the throat. So, Muallak Hadith in Sahih Bukhari, Amr ibn Rabi' mentions, I saw the Prophet ﷺ using the miswak while he was fasting more than I could count, right? Since it is excusable for tiny particles to reach the stomach, given that this obviously happens unintentionally, uh, it does not invalidate the fast because the amount is negligible, and so is the hukum for asthma inhalers because the amount therein is also negligible. Last piece of evidence is that there is no certainty about the possibility that a tiny amount of medication will reach the stomach. It's only supposed to go to the lungs anyway. There is no guarantee that it's going to the stomach. So it might not actually occur. And we know the default in fast that it's invalid until there's no doubt that it's not anymore, right? اليقين لا يزول بالشك. Applying that principle, you will keep on fasting until you can be sure of something actually entering your stomach. So that is number one. Number two, ghasil kala or dialysis, right? So some patients who suffer from kidney failure, they need to go through a procedure every 2-3 days in order to detoxify their blood and remove harmful substances from their body. Basically, when a person's kidney is not working, they have to go through this process of dialysis to do all the functions that a kidney would normally do. And Allahu Akbar, imagine just a small piece of organ, 2 organs, inside your body, which literally remove all the toxic substances that enter our body, usually through food. Now take a moment and think all of the junk that we actually consume. Forget the healthy stuff that's processed and release toxins, like vegetables. They have certain amount of toxins when they're processed in the stomach, they release, and the kidney has to remove them. And we literally actually start consuming preservatives and other chemicals in processed foods. And subhanallah, how the kidney functions so efficiently that it is able to remove all of those toxins as well. And so this in itself is something that we should make shukr of daily to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And in fact, in the hadith, the Prophet ﷺ mentions every day when a person wakes up, for each joint in their body, they should make sadaqah. For each joint in their body, they should make sadaqah. Because every joint, every organ has a function of its own, without which we would be in so much difficulty. Imagine 2-3 days a week procedure lasting anything between 45 minutes to 1.5 hours or maybe more, right? And you have that function happening inside your body with minimal notices 24/7. So sadaqah for each of your joints, and the best sadaqah or the way to give sadaqah for all of these parts is to pray 2 units of nafil prayer after sunrise and after the sun has completely risen, what we call ishraq. So 2 units of ishraq would be enough sadaqah for all 360 joints that a person has. And if someone isn't able to do that, then you should have done at least 360 good deeds a day. And so the hadith elaborates different types of sadaqah. Helping someone out is a sadaqah. Smiling to your brother, sister is sadaqah, right? Helping someone with their grocery, like picking up bags, putting it in their car, sadaqah. Um, Islah bayn al-nas, if two people are fighting, reconciling between them would be sadaqah. Every time you say Alhamdulillah sadaqah, every time you say Subhanallah sadaqah, every time you say Allahu Akbar sadaqah. So all these are forms of sadaqah. So at the very least, a person should be doing it 360 times a day as sadaqah on behalf of each joint in the body as prescribed by the Prophet of Islam. Now coming back to the masala at hand, so there are two types of dialysis. You have hemodialysis, in which a patient is connected to a machine through their vein. The machine extracts the patient's blood, filters it, removes waste and toxins. Sometimes you would add glucose and salt to it, and then returns the blood back into the body. If you or someone you know is going through this process, may Allah give you the best of health. شفاء كامل لا يغادر سقما. And if alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah, you're not in this situation, make shukr of it. Very painful procedure. So that's one, a hemodialysis. You extract the blood, clean it, put it back in. Then you have peritoneal dialysis, in which the dialysis takes place through the peritoneum, which is basically a membrane in the abdomen. So a catheter is surgically inserted above the navel, through which fluid containing large amounts of glucose and salt are pumped into the abdomen. And so they're going to remain in that membrane, which then exchanges this fluid with the blood. So basically, you place that concoction of glucose and salt, then through a process known as diffusion, uh, the waste, the waste fluid in the blood, that goes through the membrane outside the body, and that glucose sodium solution goes inside the body. Right? Then that fluid is extracted from the body, and the process is repeated. Right? So these are two types of dialysis that normally happen. In light of this information, the ruling concerning dialysis for a fasting person is that if it involves providing glucose or other nutrients, then it invalidates the fast, since such a substance is likely food, right? And it's going to nourish and strengthen the body. However, if it's just cleaning the blood from toxins and nothing nutritional is involved, and then in this case, it is not nullify the fast, according to the text. Okay? Now let's talk about medicinal patches. So medicinal patches also do not invalidate the fast since they're not food or drink, and does not pass through the throat or reach the digestive tract, nor does it leave any taste behind in the throat. Right? They don't have nourishing or strengthening effects on the body, and therefore they're not like food and drink. Right? However, if medicinal patches are similar to eating and drinking, such that they would result in your body being nourished and strengthened, then in this situation, as a precaution, we're going to place the hukum that the fast is invalid. Another medical procedure would be therapeutic injections. So intradermal and intramuscular, so inside the skin or inside the muscle. These injections do not invalidate the fast because by default, the normative hukum is the fast remains valid until clear proof tells you that it's not. And these injections are neither food nor drink. Neither do they have any characteristics of food and drink. So they're just like applying oil to the skin or taking a shower. When you do that, the pores of the body will absorb some of the water. That's why if you're very thirsty and you go take a shower, you'll feel your thirst being reduced, even though you were careful not to let anything slip through your mouth, because the pores of the body would actually absorb some of the water. That's something the Sharia does not place any hukum on. And so Ibn Taymiyyah ta'ala, in his Majmu' al-Fatawa, he mentions, applying oil to the skin does not invalidate the fast without a doubt. It's agreed upon. between all the ulama. These are for therapeutic injections, those which don't have nutritional value to them. As for intravenous injections that contain water and nutrients, such as calcium, glucose, other things, and they can actually contain as much as 10% or more water, and the rest is just nutrients. For example, antibiotic injections. These injections do actually invalidate the fast because the body contains benefits from the nutrients within the injection. Right, so anything that matches the effects of al-aklu wa shurb, eating and drinking, that such a medical procedure would in fact invalidate the fast. Now let's talk about the rukhas. When do you get, what are the excuses of not fasting, of invalidating the fast that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has provided to you? Well, you know Allah has enjoined fasting upon Muslims. كتب عليكم الصيام كما كتب على الذين من قبلكم لعلكم تتقون. Right? And we also know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not burden someone beyond their capacity. So there are cases in which you are exempted from fasting. What are those cases? The elderly who are unable to fast, the people who are sick, and those who are traveling. Moreover, those women who are having hayz or nifas, they're also not allowed to fast. And pregnant and breastfeeding mothers are also exempted from fasting. So this shows that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's mercy on his servants uh, is beyond compare, right? And so the dispensation for illness is based on the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَإِن كُنتُم مَرْضَى أَوْ عَلَى سَفَرٍ فَعِدَّةٌ مِّنْ أَيَّامٍ أُخَرَ. So when the Ramadan comes along, you're supposed to fast, except if you're traveling or sick, then make up for it in other days. Equal number of days that you miss, for those many days you make up the fast. Right? ليس في الدين من حرج يريد الله بكم اليسر ولا يريد بكم العسر. Allah intends for you ease and does not intend for you hardship. And because of his mercy, there are exemptions. Now, what are the ضابط of fitr fil maraz, right? So we know that the maris, uh, sick people are two kinds. One, if the sick person is unable to bear the fast, then he's obligated to break the fast or not to initiate the fast at all. Second, a sick person is able to fast but with hardship and suffers harm. Such a person is permitted to break the fast. It's not obligatory. You can, if you can bear the pain, go along with it. You're allowed to do so. Not advised, and you would always have the permission to break the fast during the day. Right? So if a patient is unable to fast, it is obligatory for him to try not to fast. Or sorry, that came out wrong. It's obligatory for him not to fast or try not to fast. However, if he's able to fast with difficulty, that does not amount to putting his life at risk, then he would be given the choice. You can either bear some pain and fast, or take Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's rukhsah and not fast. And remember, in Allah yuhibbu an yu'ta rukhasahu kama yu'ta zalimuhu. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves that people accept his rukhas and act upon it, just as he would love that people do the azaim, do the best action at the prescribed time. So you shouldn't be forcing yourselves too much. Now, the permission to break the fast is not contingent on advice from a doctor because the patient is more aware of their own ability, whether they can withstand the difficulty of fasting or whether they can't, right? Physicians are permitted to advise patients not to fast if they have a good reason to believe that it is going to worsen the situation of the patient or delay recovery, for example. So if they believe that a patient's life is at risk, then it would be obligatory for them to advise a patient to refrain from fasting. Similarly, if they believe that a patient's organ might be impaired due to fasting, they're also required to instruct the patient to not fast. This is because an impairment of an organ is the highest degree of hardship, and obviously this will necessitate dispensation. Now, you did not fast because you were sick. What are the obligations to make a fast for missed days? Well, there are two types of illnesses. You have curable illnesses, a patient who's expected to recover from his illness. They will permitted to break their fast, and then they're required to make it up in their days of recovery. So فَعِدَّةٌ مِّنْ أَيَّامٍ أُخَرَ. Make up in the days to come, in which you're healthy and you're not traveling anymore. So whatever the excuse you had not to fast, once that excuse is no longer there, you are supposed to make up for those fasts. And hence, if someone is unable to do so because the excuse actually lasted that long, or maybe they didn't have enough recovery days to keep up all their fasts, they should make wasiyah for kafara to be paid on their behalf. Then you have chronic illnesses. A patient who has chronic illness has the same ruling as the elderly person who is unable to fast, right? So no chance of recovery, then that person should feed a needy person for each missed fast, right? It'amu miskin for every fast that you miss. Ibn Abbas radiallahu anhu recited the verse, وَعَلَى الَّذِينَ يُطِيقُونَهُ فِدْيَةُ طَعَامِ مِسْكِينٍ. And upon those who are unable to fast but with hardship, a ransom, fidya, a substitute. And what is that substitute for fasting? طَعَامِ miskin, feeding a poor person each day, right? So this verse is not mansukh, it's not abrogated. It is meant for old men and women who don't have the strength to fast anymore. They should feed a needy person each time they miss a fast. Wallahu a'lamu bis-sawab. So if you guys have any questions about today's uh, topics, I'd be happy to